Welcome to the Self-Help Junkie podcast. My name is Max, and today I'll be discussing Evan Lucas's book, Mind Over Money, Why Understanding Your Money Behaviour Will Improve Your Financial Freedom. Evan Lucas is a money commentator on ABC News Breakfast and ABC Radio News. The book explores how thinking influences our money behaviour. He points out that our financial well-being and freedom starts with becoming financially self-aware. With this knowledge, individuals can make more informed financial decisions. Today we will discuss the book in depth, summarising the key ideas in each chapter. The podcast starts with Evan describing the difference between delayed and immediate returns.
So the way to look at delayed returns and immediate returns is that immediate, as I said, is all about now. It's about finding shelter, sleep, finding food, eating, staying alive. Delayed returns is making choice for the hope, and that's the right term, for the hope that choice actually pays off in the future. Now, that's as simple as if I go and buy food for today, I can make a sandwich tomorrow. Or if I invest my money today, I believe that in the...
so it's delaying like future gratification or current gratification, or is it...
It's delaying current gratification, but it's also the way to look at it is that we are not intrinsically ingrained to accept delayed returns. Human beings are not technically, physiologically geared to the idea of delaying our choice. Choice now equals return. Choice now equals food. Choice now equals sleep. And that's why I opened up with that idea, is that to understand that we are very much still the same, right? So we are fighting our own physiological, impulses. In a modernized world, digitized world. I mean, you and I are currently speaking through the internet. We're obviously doing a podcast and recording from that perspective. All of the returns that you and I get from this podcast are into the future. So that how many people we can get to listen to this, how many people sort of go on and listen to your stuff, Max, or maybe go and buy my book or whatever it is they do. We are both doing this in a delayed return environment, and that's another way to look at it, is that that's what it is about. And why I highlight that to start it off with is because in the world of money and in the world of investing, it is the absolute pinnacle of this, because one of the other ingrained innate things in human beings is that we don't want to acquire loss. We don't want to have work that we've done disappear. And so in the modern world, money is obviously the value that we give to work to then go and change into another asset. And what I wanted to sort of show from this is to say and understand that your feelings and your experiences and your own personal physiology is technically working against you, and that's okay. That's the other part of this, is that this is your feelings about that are completely normal. Everyone feels them, even the very best feel them, and that's why you needed to start from this idea is going. You're actually fighting your own physiology.
So you say you say a lot that our emotions are tied up with our money. What sort of emotions specifically are tied up with money, would you say?
So when I did this is sort of moving into the chapter around obviously money cognition. So it was around our own psychological biases and also around our own personalities and our experiences. So your own personality, your own emotions are caught up from the experiences you've had in your life, the relationships that you have, partner, your family, friends and family, all those kinds of things. And why I say that is that clearly you're going to have a different emotional response to money if you have watched your parents or friends and family really, really struggle with money and see it in a light that is very negative versus those that haven't. Or if you're one of those people that sort of your emotions are tied up with, persona, etc. And by persona, I mean if spending, if a certain sort of status comes with it, the way that you see money will be different to somebody that is, quite a saver, somebody that likes to sit on their money, that basically sits there and goes, this is how my money looks to me. I want to have lots of it. Where money actually goes into another realm in my argument there, which is money is just the same as an apparel item. It's a physical thing that you can show. Look, I have this money and I need to have this money to be who I am. Then there are people that speculate. There are people. So all of that, so that question, that emotion all comes down to, as I said, experience. Now, I personally, when I talk about this, I was very lucky in the fact that my grandfather.
Yeah, he was an investor.
Yeah, he was an investor. And again, what I also want to point out, it doesn't transfer to everybody. Like, so my mum, my grandfather's father, my mother's father, who was the grandfather I'm talking about here, it didn't rub off on his kids, but it rubbed off on me. And what I mean by that is that I actually got caught up in what he did.
Yeah.
And
Why do you think it rubbed off on you as opposed to your mother?
Because again, that gets back to that experience, that, the emotional thing. And what I mean by that is he was very sort of, it's a very taboo subject in Australia,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
To talk about money, it's just this thing. It's the tall poppy syndrome. It's the stigma
Yeah.
of showing you have over the have-nots. And he didn't, and he was always a very, very, humble, very conserved person. But the reason I got into it is because I was a kid and I used to watch him reading the middle pages of the paper back in the day rather than going on the internet, and all of the closing prices of all these shares, and he was adding them up. And I used to just talk to him about it, and I used to get there and watch, and I could see that the digits, not the money, because he didn't actually show the money, he just showed it on a basically a piece of paper, were getting bigger. And I was like, how does that happen? We kept explaining, and then he talked about why he was investing in BHP or Telstra or what have you, and that also sort of got to me. So I was lucky in that in my formative years, between probably day dot and my early to mid teens, I was talking to him about this, and then but for those of you out there listening that didn't have that experience, it doesn't mean you can't. It doesn't also mean that what happened to me is better or worse. I was just very lucky. But at the same time, although I had that experience, you still have to turn it into your own experience and turn it into your own attitudes and as you said before, Max, around your emotions and what have you. So the other thing you asked there about emotion is that you bring on things like biases.
Yeah.
Biases, I think, is probably what we need to talk about now, because this is the other thing. The physiology is one side, the psychology is the other. And why it's so important to understand this is biases are what allow you to navigate the world almost seamlessly.
Yeah.
So
you say there are two biases, money cognition. So they're cognitive, and then there are emotional biases. Is that like the two main biases?
Well, they're two branches, but by that, so money cognition is obviously money thought, right? So cognition is obviously your thought processes. Emotion also comes into it, and biases move into that, right? So they, as I said, biases are designed to allow you to seamlessly move through the world, because if you didn't have them, it'd take a very long time.
It's a way of simplifying.
Yeah, it's also shortcutting, right?
Yeah,
so you and I know how to talk to each other, right? We are looking at each other right now. We can interact, and we are picking up emotional cues, body cues, language cues, the way that we're discussing, and your mind automatically knows how to react because you've had experience, you've had all that, and it's formed your ideal. So as I said in the book, just as a very sort of, over the top example, if you were to meet the Queen, obviously before she passed away, you would know how to act in front of her, compared to if you met an old friend from school who, you'd known for years. The way you behave will be completely different in those two scenarios.
Yeah. So should we go through
things.
Should we go through the different biases? So the first one I remember you mentioned in your book was loss aversion. So losing money hurts more than making it is the key.
So with this one, this is the most linked to money. It was also the bias that got the main author in Daniel Kahneman, who I'm an absolute acolyte of.
Yeah.
It got him the Nobel Prize, and this is a psychologist, and he got it in economics. And what he showed was that, as he said, human beings are geared towards basically minimizing loss. So the simple way to argue it to you is this: if you put your hand into your pocket and you pulled out $50 and you didn't know it was there, the elation of that will last up to as much as 4 or 5 hours, if you're lucky. Of finding that $50. Wow, fantastic. This is a great windfall. Off I go.
Yeah.
If you reverse the scenario,
if you lost it,
but not if you knew that $50 was in your pocket, and then you put your hand in and you couldn't find it, you can dwell on that for up to 3 weeks. Wow, that's what the studies find. So your catch on that, what Kahneman and his partner in Amos Tversky proved was that what also happens is he did it with a bigger sum scenario and a mathematical equation, where basically the mathematical equation was identical. The actual agreed make or agreed loss was the same. It was $900 US. But he showed that when it comes to loss also, and we are known to make loss, we will take bigger risk. So let's say you've lost that $50, you know you've lost it. You will actually go and search and search and search and search and, inverted commas, waste your own opportunity, despite the fact that you've got a job to do, you've got other things that actually will make that $50 very quickly. That loss of that $50 will actually consume you so much that you'll take riskier things. So what he also proved, what Cardman proved, was that if your investment, house, equities, whatever it happens to be, you are likely to concentrate on the loss, even though you might be net positive, and then try and fix that by taking more risk. So I'm down 5%. I need to buy more into it, or I need to do something risky to try and get that 5% back, despite the fact that other investments might be up 10%.
So do a risky investment to make the money again.
Yeah. So it's fascinating is that this is loss aversion, right? So it does two things. First one, it can actually stop you from making a decision. And what I mean by that is that instead of actually trying to grow your wealth in what I do in my world, which is, looking at basically making sure that your overall position is growing. Because in my world, and we'll talk about this later, but in my world, all I want is having the ability to do what I want, when I want, how I want. And that's autonomy. Autonomy is, for me, and actually it's been proven by the several psychological journals, is what most human beings want. Yeah. But what happens also is that therefore means that if I don't risk, I can't lose. So that's the first part of risk aversion. That is actually possibly a negative, because inflation happens, and we're seeing that right now. But also it means that you can miss out on opportunities to help you. The other side, as I just said before, the other part of loss aversion is that once loss happens, human beings, it doesn't matter what culture you come from, what background you come from, human beings are geared to fix that, because we don't like being wrong, and therefore we will take risks that we shouldn't take in the first place.
Right. And another common bias is anchoring. So anchoring describes your first impression of a financial situation. Could you give us a common example of anchoring in the money world that you've experienced?
Yeah. And it's not, as I want to also leave there, anchoring is not just in the money world. I mean, you can hear from your definition of what anchoring is.
Yeah.
First impressions last. This is what anchoring is basically based on, is that that your first impression is very hard to break.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing in the money world. If you have an impression that something is worth X, that can what we call anchor you and blinker you from making a right decision. So the way I use it in the book is around a car. If you have a view that a car is worth 30 grand, you may actually therefore anchor yourself to that's the best thing and the best price, despite the fact that you might actually be able to shop around and get a better car for the same price of 30 grand, or that the dealer down the road can actually give you at 5 grand less, because you've anchored yourself at a price point for something that you believe is worth X. That is where anchoring comes in. But as I said, the best way to explain it to you is anchoring is the idea of first impressions, and that bias, again, when you think about it, it's really clear, because again, that you do this in everyday life. It's how we navigate everyday life. When it comes, and we know that we shouldn't do it in real life. So when it comes to money, you definitely shouldn't do it either.
Yeah. And then the last three are attention bias, confirmation bias, and availability bias. Yeah, they're quite similar, I'd say.
Yeah, they are. So, and I'm glad you put them together. So the AAC, as they call it. So confirmation bias is pretty clear, and not only that, in the modern world, and particularly with what you're doing right now, listening to podcasts or what have you, you're finding this through social media, getting your bias confirmed is pretty easy. If you have a view, you can go online.
It validates your view, and you seek to seek to validate.
And that's simple. So if you believe that the financial world's going to end, it's pretty hard. It's pretty easy to go and find that view. Do you know what I mean? So it's very easy to confirm your loss aversion bias by going, I don't want to make any decision because I think, high inflation, high interest rates, it's going to create a scenario where the whole world's going to end. You can find that view. Even though that's probably the wrong view, it confirms your view and confirms your bias. Attention bias and availability bias, they really do mix into each other.
Yeah.
So I'll put them together. Attention bias is, as it sounds, something grabs your attention. So the example I use, 2021, for those of you that can remember the GameStop sort of saga.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
the fact that these people were piling into GameStop,
Mm.
driving it to this and the available information that you had was that these people were winning, not the fact that the actual underlying reason that GameStop happened was a Reddit group that basically was trying to take on a hedge fund manager. That was lost. Your attention was drawn to the fact that there was people making not just 50 grand or 100 grand. We were talking millions. Some people were making millions of dollars, and a lot of people jumped into it. But the issue with attention is that you have a very, very small point of information versus the whole universe of information. And that therefore always can lead to mistakes, and that's obviously there. That's availability bias, attention bias, and availability bias is pretty much the same. It's again, information amount is very limited. So your available information is very low, but you make decisions off it. It happens very clearly for when we are more likely to buy than sell, because we have so much information to shift through. Whereas when you sell something, you already have it. But when you're trying to buy something, in particularly in the equity world, the available information, if something can help you overcome having to go through everything with the available information you have, then you can do it easier. So those three are very similar as well.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go through the different money personalities and see all the different, we'll compare them all. So first of all, there's the saver. So the saver, simply put, is someone who just saves their money and spends very little. Are there any other key principles to their behavior, the saver?
Not really. So we've also probably covered them a little bit in the fact that the saver also, as I said to you, it goes from being a saving mentality to almost that money's a physical thing.
Yeah.
So they will let opportunity pass them by. They will, the opportunity to buy their own home or to upgrade their overall wealth scenario, because they are so connected to physical cash.
Yeah.
That's the catch. So some people look at savers as going, oh, they've got such a great personality. I'm like, there's no perfect personality. The other thing I want to say before we go through all the 5 that I've done is that some people argue there's 10 of them. The other thing I want to point out is that it's fluid, right? You're not a box. You don't go,
so you're not just one. You can have different aspects of all of them.
So what we'll do, let's go to the next one, which I know is spending. Why I want to do that is that I want to tell you straight away that I actually blend through several of them.
We can compare them all at the same time.
So with a spender,
the
spender is obviously almost the complete opposite. It doesn't mean a spender's broke. What it means is that a spender are those that live for now. They will spend on the newest thing. They will basically use money to get what they want as fast as they can. They invest in the finer things in life. It's probably the simplest scenario.
So they do a lot of investing, or is it just spending on goods that they want?
It is spending on goods that they want. So the best way to say it to you, they are the epitome of keeping up with the Joneses, right? So the spenders just basically go, see money, use money, enjoy in that sort of line. Again, it doesn't mean that they're bad with money.
Yeah. How would they be different to the debtors if spenders and debtors are both spending money?
So this is the other personality. Debtors, they're a bit different again in the fact that they are living off a debt cycle. So spenders might actually work, get money, spend money, start again, but don't go into debt. Debtors live on debt, and they can't see how people don't do that.
And is their debt mostly consist of just everyday goods, or is it something?
It can be, yes. It can be lots of things. Everyday consumables. They tend to live credit card to credit card. They don't also see like paying off. So what I mean by that is that they use credit to credit to credit. They use therefore debt to debt to debt. They are the ones that sort of roll through credit. They're the ones that need the most help because they don't see how you can get out of it. They also don't have this view. And again, this is not a negative. What I want to say is that these people, they know that they live on this scenario. They know this. And yes, they tend to be, unfortunately, those that are on the lower socioeconomic group, because this is the way they can actually survive. To buy, actual what we call essentials, health, food, shelter, energy, education, on debt, and they're just rolling through it.
Yeah. How would the ignorer be a spender or a bit of a saver? Or is it kind of just ignoring their finances? Or
so it's the latter. So the ignorer is sort of a slight outlier to what we've just discussed, and we'll get to the investor in a minute. But the ignorer is actually the majority of the population. Most people,
really, wow.
Yes, most people actually don't pay attention to their own finances.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is that they work, they own a business, they do whatever they do. Money comes in, money goes out. They
Yeah.
don't necessarily invest. They don't necessarily buy a home, or if they do, they buy it for, reasons that are not necessarily financial. They just buy it because they know they have to. They also are more likely than not to actually outsource their money requirements. So they are more likely to get a partner, a friend, an advisor to look after their financials because they
like an accountant or
an accountant, a financial advisor, again, a friend, somebody that they trust. Now there's catches to that. Obviously, you can hear that in terms of saying is that, everybody has good intentions, but unfortunately there are, inverted commas, some bad eggs, and that can lead them to that scenario.
Yeah.
It also means that, a lot of these people don't actually know where their money is coming and going from. Like ignorers just, they won't necessarily pick up their phone and look at their banking app, if they even have one. They definitely won't have their superannuation app on their phone. They are very unlikely to have. And so because they ignore their money, they're not, it's almost inverted commas, and this is a terrible term, but it's probably true. They're just drifting because they're allowing things to happen and they're allowing other people to take decisions that they need to make.
Cool. Okay. So in chapter 5, this chapter centers on conflict involving money.
Yep.
You say that research shows that fights over money are the second most common cause of divorce in the US behind infidelity.
Yep.
What specifically about money causes divorce, and what are the most common relationship money issues you have witnessed?
So the financial stress is part of it. So if you've got, again, let's go back to the personalities. If you've got a spender and a saver, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But clearly there's going to be conflict with a person that obviously likes to hold money and a person that likes to spend it.
Yeah.
And that stress that comes with it. Those that, are very happy to basically leverage themselves up. It's not necessarily a debtor per se, but those that actually do, use a lot of debt and credit cards go from that. That same chapter, I show that, some of the biggest, what we call money turnoffs, personality turnoffs, are what we call destructive spending, gambling, overly done on alcohol and tobacco. Those kinds of things are destructive spending. And this is conflict of money, right? This is the last one to talk about, and I'm going through this really quickly, the rise of what we call financial infidelity. So you talked about infidelity on the physical aspect. Financial infidelity is the most growing cause of marriage collapse. The reason for it, for those of you who don't know what it is, financial infidelity is where, as I said before, let's say one partner is leveraging themselves up or doing something, destructive spending, gambling, buying things secretively. But the thing is, with a couple and a lot of, for a lot of couples, their money is combined. So if they are leveraging their gambling debts onto the mortgage of the house, it's not just the gambler that's on the hook, the partner is too. And so when the partner finds out, it's not just the cheating, inverted commas, of using money that they had. It's actually the years of loss, the amount of money, time, work, effort put into saving for the house or saving for the financial future of your family, that disappears. And it's actually been found to be even more detrimental than physical infidelity, in the fact that the initial, mental and physical hurt can be overcome. The financial scenario, legally can't. You are tied to that debt. So even though you haven't caused it as the partner, you are legally tied to it if you've signed up for a loan. And so that's what's so dangerous about financial infidelity and why it's becoming such a conflict.
So, how often should couples discuss their finances, and what are the key areas of personal finance they need to discuss?
My argument would be as often as you can. But again, talking about money, it's not easy. Even inside family, talking about money is sort of this taboo subject.
So what is Australia's money culture? Like, is our money culture normal in terms of Western culture, or not good?
So again, that's a great question from the point of view that if you compare us to, particularly, it tends to be actually, and I know this is a really weird way of saying it, it tends to be quite a UK-centric culture. So if you're a Commonwealth nation, you tend to have a similar view, which is that it's a bit of a taboo subject. So the UK, Australia, New Zealand, to some extent Canada, they're a bit different. Just don't talk about money. The US is different. The US is absolutely the opposite way. They've flipped that culture. They talk about it a lot. But if you look into Europe, Europe's really interesting. And why I say that is that they have versions of collective cultures, like in Asia. So you look at Mediterranean cultures, money is talked about because it's for the family, and the family works as a unit. Whereas in, particularly masculine societies like Australia, like the UK, it's the nuclear family. So you look into Asia, it's a bit different. Talking about money is part of the family, as in we are working as a unit for the family. So money has to be working for all of us. So they talk about it. So back to your question, for us here in Australia, the reason it's so hard is that it is taboo, right? There is this tall poppy syndrome to it. Not only that, it's like, when you have made a mistake or there is an infidelity, inverted commas, around it, in the fact that, is my partner going to be disappointed? Are they going to be upset? Are they going to see me in a different light? So there's plenty of really interesting stories from all sort of the spectrums. Like there's a story that when I did this book, looking at, there was a woman who was really, really nervous about talking to her partner about her previous credit card debts. And when she finally told him, he was like, "That's fine, we'll get through it." But vice to that, whereas, a guy who had massive issues around dealing with his money, and he had huge student loans and credit card debts, his partner couldn't handle it because she didn't see it as something they could get through, and it did end them. So that's why it's scary as well, is that, you are putting yourself out there, you are putting out there something that may or may not, create a fracture in your relationship.
Yeah. So you say a percentage of weekly income should be put into a me account. So can you just quickly go over what a me account is, and for like a regular couple, how often they should be putting money into this me account?
Yeah. So again, what I want to point out before I answer this is this isn't for everybody. So this example that I've got here is everybody is different. What you do. So I say, the way I describe this is you are you, I am me. So what you guys want to do will be different. What the evidence is starting to show more and more is that couples are becoming a scenario where they have the couple account and then, as you said, a me account. Money that you can put aside that is just for you, that you can then use in your own certain way. So if you do go and blow it on a sort of golf clubs, or, a big night out, or an apparel, or whatever it is, it's your money only. It's not the family's finances. So you're not putting the family finances under any strain. It's called hybrid using. Again,
is this similar to the bucket strategy you talked about? So
different.
No,
this is different.
Okay,
this is a little bit different.
We'll do that one after we discuss this one. Yeah,
we'll get this. It's different. This is about managing the sort of the relationship.
And so there's no financial infidelities.
Yeah, and it's also about what the studies also show is that when you become a couple, there is we need to understand human beings are individualistic, particularly Western side human beings. And there is still a small part of you that will want to have your ability to do your own thing, right? Even in a couple, and that's completely normal and completely fine. And so having a little bit of your own money outside of the family, the partner, or the whole group can give you that sort of, it also gives you a bit of peace of mind. It gives you that understanding that you do have something, inverted commas, for yourself. And that is not selfish. I want to point that out very clearly. Again, the whole premise of what I wrote about was trying to do it from a point of view to say that there's no right or wrong answer. Don't feel society's norms of, that's selfish, that's not selfish, you should do X, Y, Z. What you do is what's good for you, and that is fine. So if you do need to have, inverted commas, a me account that has some money in it that you can control, that you can use for yourself, the benefit, the net benefit is clear. And that's what I think it needs to be pointed out from.
Okay, so we'll look at the today money, tomorrow money, and beyond money. So today money, that's just for paying the day-to-day bills. Is that?
So this is the bucket strategy you talked about before. Yeah. So the way I look at it, like when it was first done back in the 80s, the way it was done was basically for retirees. It was, as you said, what retirees needed was that they needed their money set up in a way that they could live in a very, very, well way. Money for today. So they had cash in a cash account that they could access, an account that was what I refer to as tomorrow, But it was basically the way they looked at it is that it had income generating products. We don't need to go into it too much, but that if it was making anything, if it was, turning deposits, what have you, that money, that income it generated would flow down the buckets into the today bucket. So the money was being replenished. So the money that people were spending was being replenished from the bucket above. And the bucket above that, as I refer to it, is beyond, is where your money is.
Is that for superannuation, the beyond fund?
Superannuation, exactly right. It's actually money that you're not going to need for a minimum of 7 years, more likely 10 to 15 to 20 years. Because it has time to grow. It has time to compound on itself. And again, as you hit retirement, the argument was that anything that came out of that went down into the income bucket and so on and so forth. But what you're talking about there, what I had, Max, in the book, is that there's actually a better way of looking at it, in my view, which is you have money today, you have money for tomorrow, and you have money for beyond. So you've talked about it already. Beyond is your superannuation. If you have some form of housing asset, that kind of thing as well. If you've got an investment portfolio, if you've got, a long-term money that's actually working for you that you don't need today or tomorrow. And what I mean by that, if you, right now, high inflation, high interest money, that tomorrow, that beyond money shouldn't probably be used for it because it's about what is actually not today's problem. What I mean by that is that, yes, we know we've got these higher living costs, but your beyond money is actually going, we actually need to think about it from the point of view that we need to look at it as what does 2023 look like, but realistically, what does 2033 look like? So the one to talk about there is tomorrow. Tomorrow can be tomorrow. It can be 3 years. It can be 5 years. It can be 7 years away. It's some people call it a rainy day bucket. I don't like calling it that. It's more. It should have a goal attached to it. So why I say that is that for me, my tomorrow money is actually for my 2 girls and for their future and their education and their needs. So I'm actually putting money in tomorrow that if something got really bad, I could use it. But I'm trying to make sure that I have enough money for that time in the future, tomorrow, when I need to actually start using it to invest, using it for them and their needs. I've got the money for when they actually need it. That's my tomorrow. Some people, as I said, is for right now where I do actually need to use it to sustain my living standards because we've got an environment that is quite difficult. So I hope that sort of explains, today, tomorrow, but your today money in what I'm going, because we're going backwards. Today money is your income, right? If you're working, that's your today money, right? That's your income. You've got money coming in from
and should a bit of that money go to tomorrow? And
yes, good, exactly right. So your today money should be enough to sustain what you want to do. Whatever's left, as Max just pointed out perfectly, goes into tomorrow and also into beyond. And once you start doing that, it creates routine, it creates habit as well. And you'll start to actually understand that you can invest for your future. You can self-help yourself by actually not just living for today, but also living for a time continuum scenario.
Okay, so I think with investing, you talk a lot about compound interest. So why is this so important in investing, and what's the best strategy for maximizing the effects of compound interest?
So yes, compound interest, as I said in the book, has been accredited, not necessarily proven, but accredited to Einstein as saying
the eighth wonder of the world.
It's the eighth wonder of the world. And why it is because exactly you've got a scenario where you are always seeing your interest grow on itself. So if you remember your year 10 maths, your simple interest versus compound interest. Compound interest is basically any gains that you make gets reinvested back on. It's increased by a certain amount and so on and so forth. The one of the best arguments is that if you were to basically double a penny for a month, you'd be a millionaire by day 30. So it's a really extreme version of compound interest, but that's the way to look at it. So way I talk about it is that if you look at the ASX 200 in the book, over the last 10 years, although people don't realize this, it averages about 9.8% per annum, which means when I wrote the book,
as in the ASX, so that's the average of all the Australian stocks, is it?
Yeah, including their dividends. So the average return of the ASX, so the biggest 200 ASX stocks, including the dividends, what we call reinvested, so using the compound interest example,
Mm.
over 10 years, if you had invested from that period, you made 155%. That's how compound interest works. So that 9.8% just compounding
Yeah.
works in that way. Now, some people like to talk to you about that like it's this beautiful, linear, smooth thing that happens. Compound interest, when you taught it at school, is shown as that. And again, if you were to look at a term deposit, you could make that argument. Term deposits aren't perfect because they're not true compound interest. They're not reinvesting every day. They're reinvesting at the end of your term. A home loan, unfortunately, is a compound interest example, but it goes in the other way because every day your bank is actually.
I was going to ask that because you say with home loans, debt doesn't work in your favor; it works against you. So I thought, should paying one's debt or mortgage be the number one financial priority so it doesn't keep building up?
Not necessarily number one, but it should certainly be up there all the time. Like again, if you can, the faster you pay off principal, the less compound interest is working against you. And what that means is that obviously when you borrow money from the bank or whoever it is, if you can pay your $500,000 mortgage off faster, the amount of interest that is put back into the loan gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, so you want to pay not just the interest, but a little bit of the principal too, so it's not.
And not just a little bit, if you can, if you can afford to, overpaying per month is better. So as I talk about in there, we're sort of skipping ahead, but let's talk about it, is that, one of the tricks of the trade with regards to talking about what you're there with, Max, is a bank will set you up normally to pay your monthly repayments monthly, right? But if you actually pay fortnightly, you actually end up paying roughly a month.
Twice.
Well, you pay a month extra a year.
Oh, okay.
Because there's more fortnights in a year than there are months. And because obviously we've got 31 days and all this kind of stuff, that additional repayment can actually reduce a 30-year mortgage by 5 years. So instead of paying 30 years of repayments, you pay 25, and therefore the total interest reduction is about 40%.
Yeah. Is the interest, so not just the extra interest you have to pay, but is it compounding with the principal? Is that?
So it does to an extent. So what you're talking about there is you look at something like the principal shouldn't change, but your interest rate, right? When you do a repayment per month, the bank will give you a set rate. Let's say it's $2,000 a month. And inside that will be the interest component and the principal payoff component.
Yeah.
If you're paying $2,100, for example, instead of the $2,000, that extra $100 isn't interest repayments, it's principal repayments, which also means that if you don't change your monthly repayment, or as I argue, your fortnightly repayment, the principal to interest component, the interest component's always getting smaller.
Yeah.
So the less amount of interest you can pay, this is the compound interest in reverse concept.
Yeah.
The less interest you're paying and the more principal you're paying, the faster you pay it off, the less interest you pay the bank. Yeah. Therefore, you own your home faster. The asset you own is yours faster. And in the end, it works in your favor that you're that's inverted commas. It's almost the aim of the game when you look at a loan, is that the lowest amount of interest you can pay, the better, because all that a principal is just turning what we call liquid assets, your money, your physical cash, into a property asset. That's what you're just changing it into. So the faster you can turn your cash into property without having to pay the interest charge that comes with it, the better.
All right. So chapter 8 refers to money culture and Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions. So there are 6 cultural dimensions that impact an individual's attitude towards money. That being power distance, indulgent versus restraint, long-term orientation versus short-term orientation, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, and individualism versus collectivism. So I'll just define each cultural dimension, and then I'll ask you how this factor influences an individual's behavior towards money. So a high power distance in a culture means having a strong attachment to a hierarchical order in which everybody has a place and no further justification is needed. How does this cultural dimension impact an individual's relationship with money?
So with these just as you pointed out, so this is Hochschiff. So Gert Hochschiff was the famous Dutch sociologist. He wasn't a psychologist, sociologist, that basically tried to frame culture. I want to point this out very clearly. Culture and definition of culture and money, it's very young. And it's still being done. There is a lot of gray area to it. And this I thought would be the best way to do it. I remember doing, cultural psychology at university and going, this is incredible, but there's obviously a lot of nuance to this, because again, you're trying to group a group of people in a certain way. And as we know, we're individual, even collective societies are individual. So in terms of high power distance, as you just pointed out there, so the great example always in money is pointing out somewhere like Japan versus us actually here in Australia. So the Japanese are very, very
hierarchical,
very tied. So they have what we call a high power distance. So they, the cultural dissidence, as we refer to it, breaking cultural norms is very much untoward and very much not in their culture to do that. And it's the same with how they invest. So why we say that, the Japanese are very, very strongly correlated with investing in their own country, investing in their own debt. So they're the highest owners of the country in the world of their own government debt. So what we call Japanese government bonds, the highest owners of that are actually Japanese people. Whereas around the world, most debt, and this again, something most people won't even consider, when a government issues a bond, it's bought up around the world, and Japan's high power distance is actually correlated with that strategy. I know that's a really technical highbrow thing, but that's the best way to answer. Japan's the great example.
Yeah. Okay, so the second one is indulgent versus restraint. So indulgence allows relatively free gratification of basic and natural human drives, these being the enjoyment of life and having fun. So how does this cultural dimension impact an individual's relationship with money?
And again, what I want to point out, there's no right or wrong answer to this.
Yeah.
So indulgent in itself, you can hear there's certainly Western societies particularly are bordered towards this side versus restraint. So again, the nations that are most studied in this scenario from a monetary perspective are particularly Southeast Asian developing countries. They are very much restraint. It's all about the family. Indulging in your own personal self is not seen as something that helps society and helps culture. So that's the best way to answer those two.
Again, there's long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. So long-term's pragmatic encouragement of thrift sees modern education as a way to prepare for the future.
Yep. And you can see they sort of blend into each other. So the similar thing again. The studies show that again, the catch there is that long-term orientation around education in most Western societies is quite high, but it's very strong also in collective societies. The betterment of the society, the betterment of the collective. So education is there, but allowing short-term norms. So it sort of reverses slightly in the fact that, again, Western money spending can be quite indulgent, can be quite short-term thinking, rather than collective societies that tend to think long-term, think for the family.
All right. So the next one is masculinity versus femininity. So a masculine culture has a societal preference for the characteristics of achievement, heroism, assertiveness, and material rewards for success. So how does this cultural dimension impact an individual's relationship with money?
So this is probably the most known of cultural dimensions, the masculine, feminine scenario. Everyone sort of has had some interaction with this part. So again, Europe's a great example. You look at, the Scandinavian countries, they sit on the feminist side, whereas you look at places like the UK, or you look at Australia, you look at the US, they tend to be bordering on the more masculine side. In the world of money, it tends to be actually, again, the collective nuclear family and the aspiration of success through, probably through sort of material wealth is the way to look at that. Masculine society is very much driven by status, even though we've just talked about, tall poppy syndrome. That's an Australian specific cultural thing. But we are driven by the idea of, strive. That's a very masculine culture.
Yeah. And then there's uncertainty avoidance. So a culture with high uncertainty avoidance refers to a society that has a rigid codes of beliefs and behaviors and a high level of intolerance for unorthodox behaviors and ideas.
So this is very similar to power distance in terms of that idea. Again, one of the things about culture that's so hard to define is breaking social cultural norms is very strong in some and others. So obviously in Australia, breaking social cultural norms it's tolerated quite a lot, in fact. people are allowed to protest. People are allowed to have a high level of free speech. People are allowed to think in a way that doesn't necessarily agree with you. Whereas intolerance to that tends to be authoritarian regimes. So you look at places like Russia, Iran. These are the ones that always get thrown up very quickly when they do these tests. Breaking social norms is absolutely intolerable. It will break all fabric of culture. So when it comes to money as well, it also means that the hierarchy in society tends to be the hierarchy in money. So getting ahead of your station with your money can actually become problematic with you. So again, China is the one that a lot of people throw up. You look at someone, again, it's a very specific example, but you look at what's happened to someone like Jack Ma over the last 5 years. He tried to break the social cultural norm of growing Alibaba, starting to actually have his own personal, have his own personal opinions about the direction of China, and that has ended very badly for him.
So is China a collectivist sort of culture, would you say?
Yes, technically it is. I mean, again, the studies show that it is, but China's a bit different again, is that it's not just a collective society. It has a political structure that is very, very rigid and very uncompromising. So you put them together and you have a very, very strong chain of command, and breaking social norms is very much a taboo thing.
So the last one is individualism versus collectivism. So individualism is the preference for a loose social framework.
Yeah, whereas collectivism is for a structured social. So the way to look at that is that, again, it's not as simple as that. So why I say that is that there are, what would be seen normally as a collective society in Europe individualistic society in Europe actually have collective norms and vice versa. So Asia, it's always been put like Asia's collective, Europe and the West is individualist. That's not true. It doesn't work that simply. I mean, you look at some of the ways that sort of Italy, for example, works, the way that, their family culture and the way that the family, that's a collective society norm. You're working with a family. I mean, I don't want to use the example, but it's a good one. The mafia is the great example of that. And the fact that, despite the fact that they are obviously up to no good, the mafia works as a collective society. It works for the good as the family. And the hierarchy works in their favor. Although inside that there are, turmoil and individualism. It works as a collective society and works quite well. Again, if you look at sort of how the Scandinavians work, they're technically considered individualists, but they have a collective society mindset. Their high level of taxation is for the collective good. So that one's also the one most people have come across. And again, in the world of money, it's not as easy as that because societies, are quite different. And again, when family comes involved, the collectivism gets higher. So one thing I argue in the book is that Australia technically is an individualistic society. We tend to think in the nuclear family. But if you look at those societies that work as a family and as a unit, connect to my grandfather as the next example, if you're all working together, the family actually improves faster. And again, the economics and the maths of it shows that it's what we call economies of scale. More money working together in a larger number actually gives you a greater return. So if the family money is working together in a family way, the return for all is better and actually larger.
Yeah. All right. So a few chapters after the cultural part is that there's diversification. So you talk about how diversification is important in alleviating fear in terms of investing. So are you saying one should diversify to reduce fear of losses or to minimize losses themselves?
Both. So diversification, what the studies show with diversification is that it allows you to have a buffer in risk events, but also capture upside in risk on events. So when I keep using this word risk, and I forget that I'm sort of who I'm talking to here. When we say risk can be both risk on and risk off. So risk off is a period where there is high level uncertainty. Your portfolio can be exposed to rapid movements. COVID-19, great example, right? So when the pandemic started, markets went ballistic. They went all over the shop. They did all sorts of things. So when you're diversified and your money is spread across a range of assets, it's the same concept. And it's really simple. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's the same idea in the fact that if you had all of your money just in cash or just in, by what I say, fixed income, government bonds, corporate bonds, something that gives you a yield, but a little bit of capital gains, or just equities, investing in stocks. That alone, just by hearing that clearly has risk to it because you're exposed to one thing only. If you spread your money across those assets, including things like property, whatever else you may want to.
Yeah. Could you provide an example of a diversified portfolio?
Yep. So the other thing that comes into when you talk about diversification, it's called risk reward. So this is again the whole book has been around getting you to try and understand who you are. As I said, you are you, I am me. I'm quite assertive with my risk. I know what I want to do with my money. So why I say that to your example.
Yeah. So your comment on Markowitz showed that most investments are either high risk with high returns or low risk with low returns.
Yeah. So Harry Markowitz, again, another Nobel Prize winner in economics, he came up with what we call the modern portfolio theory around diversification. His mathematics proved that if you've got a risk profile of growth or a high growth scenario, you are happy to take on a higher risk for the higher reward. You're also therefore more likely to take on longer time with your investments as well.
Is it important to have a balance of high risk and low risk investments, or what would you say?
Even someone like me, an assertive investor, you still need low risk investments. I still need to have cash exposure. I still need to have fixed income for the market risks that come, so that when the markets do inevitably fall, and they will, that I've got another part of my portfolio just supporting, so that I'm not having complete and utter loss. I've got some other areas, but it means that when it moves on the other side, it's the other way around. Now let's flip that. If I was a super conservative investor, right, and I just had cash and I just had fixed income because I didn't want to be exposed to the equity market, the catch with that is that your return is going to be significantly lower. Now that's fine if you're a conservative person, but even a conservative person needs to have some equity upside, because the average compound return of an equity, as I said to you with the ASX 200 as the example, is 9.5%. If you've got 10% of your portfolio to that, it's going to improve your overall long-term numbers, even though 90% of your portfolio is cash and fixed income. So that's why diversification works, because it buffers you to the downside, helps you to the upside, and it spreads your risk. And that's what again, Harry Markowitz proved in modern portfolio theory was around this idea of spreading your risk. And it therefore, as you said, psychologically, it also alleviates bad decisions. If you're overly exposed to one sector or not, and something goes wrong, you will make a decision to try and fix that, and that can end up against you and against your favor.
You also talk about a concept called ring fencing, which is the tendency to become hyper-focused on specific investments or investment classes in your portfolio, rather than considering the wider view of your portfolio overall. So is this an unconscious habit? And how can we prevent it from happening?
Yep, unconscious habit or bias.
Yeah.
This sort of is moving into the other concept that I've sort of raised in there, which is what I call the elephant paradigm. Understanding that, as Max just pointed out there, again, human beings, loss aversion, talked about this before, attention bias, availability bias. We like to concentrate on individual things rather than looking at the whole. So the elephant paradigm, as I try and explain it, is, it's a kid's joke. How do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. Reverse that. How do you look at your elephant as a whole, right? Rather than individual pieces. So how do you look at...
So this kind of ties in with familiarity bias, would you say?
To some extent, it's a little bit different. I'll come to familiarity bias. But for your ring fence question, if we keep siloing, if we keep ring fencing out issues, you will get, as you said, hyper-focused on the wrong thing. So this also goes back to the loss aversion point. If you're looking at that $50 loss rather than the fact that your overall wealth, your income, your portfolio, if you have it, your interest income that you might get from a term deposit account, all of that together will net together overtake that $50, but you just keep concentrating and ring fence on that problem, you will lose sight of your ultimate goal. So getting back to your question about familiarity bias, the other thing that the studies show is that, again, human beings, we know what we know, and we therefore like to stay with what we know. And this is
you say how
bias.
people invest in stocks that they know, or industries that they work in.
And it's familiar to you, and that's a good reason. I mean, the example that I also try and use is that Australians have never invested as much as they do now, which I think is a fantastic thing. So it's now about 4 in 10 Australians actually invest. I'd love to get it towards 6 or 7. which is a really good thing because people are starting to understand that the worth of it. But when you drill into it, what's also fascinating, this is the familiarity bias argument, is that we invest in Australia only versus, again, the diversification point. Diversification also means not just investing in Australian equities, it means investing in international equities and international fixed income and so forth. And why that matters is that international equities over the last 20 years have actually outperformed Australian equities. And you're missing out on that thing. But because it's not familiar to you, because you don't know it, people avoid it. So only 2% of the 4 in 10 people actually have some reasonable size international exposure in their portfolios.
With regard to what you're saying about the elephant paradigm, so when looking at the big picture, which are the core parts that need to be analyzed?
So core parts would be, again, all of it, right? So the elephant is the elephant, right? You can't separate an elephant in its physical form. So everything needs to be put in. It means once, because why you do this, if again, and I know I'm sort of going from a point of view that not everybody will have this, but if you look at your total wealth, everything that you have, the cash in your bank account, the income that you get, your superannuation, what other assets you have, car, bike, house, investment portfolio, whatever it is, when you actually group that together and see what that's worth, that's your elephant. And why that matters is that because we tend to silo things, we do look individually, it puts a negative slant to how you read. It will therefore mean that it's much easier to go, I'm in a tough scenario, rather than realizing it. And I'm about to re-release the second edition of this book next year. And I've just rewritten a new thing about gratification, right? So like money gratification falls into the same principle. On the idea is that what we know is that with gratification, it's around embracing the have in a positive way. So once you know your elephant's actually working for you in a positive way and you are happy with what you have, it goes from a scarcity view, a scarcity mindset, to an abundance mindset. I actually have. Even if, in your mind, it might be little, but you have, $30,000, $10,000 is a lot of money for a lot of people. And you therefore, if you can see that in an abundance, that it's actually, it's there, it's growing for me, it will change your mindset. It'll change your outlook on the current scenario and future current scenarios in a much, much more positive way. And that gratification of understanding that your elephant is actually yours, it's working your way, that you have more than you realize, you have an abundance of resources as we talk about it. It's such an incredible change. And it's not just in money, it's in life as well. But that's the studies that showed you that's how you change, gratification. I'm not normally into that kind of stuff, but it's actually physically writing down what you have, finding your money elephant, understanding that once you write that down and you keep being sort of grateful for that, it changes that scarcity to abundance mindset. And an abundance mindset, anything's possible.
Okay, so throughout the book, you stress the importance of finding your individual finance goals. However, there are an array of factors that can negatively influence your spending habits, one of them being the pressure to spend. How can we avoid the pull of social pressure spending?
So this is one of the hardest things to do. And why I say that is that this gets back down to that society thing. We know keeping up with the Joneses in this, what you're talking about now is that, again, it gets back to the physiology of talking about this. This is things like dopamine, right? So spending is something you can actually control, right? You have control. So, COVID-19 taught this to us that, when chaos happens and you don't have control, what can you control? Spending's a very good one. It also, unfortunately, triggers a psychological and physiological response. The physiological is dopamine. Now, we all have heard of dopamine sometime in our life or not, but obviously it's seen as that pleasure kick. And it reinforces that spending gives you A, control, and B, a pleasure kick. What they also then find is that it's not actually the actual purchase itself, it's the anticipation that gives you that thing. So breaking this is very difficult, and I understand that. What I try and argue is that, okay, if you are into a scenario where you need control by spending, can you turn investing as a spending? And what I mean by that, the money put to buying X, a shirt, a pair of shoes, a bike, whatever it is, if you could use that inverted commas spending as investing, so I call it spend vesting. Could you spend that $200 on that top, all of those shoes, into $200 into a high interest account or into your automatic investing, and get the same investment, or sorry, the same spending kick out of that? It will take time. It's like running a marathon. You can't just walk out the front door and start running a marathon. It's, you've got to start the first kilometer and so on and so forth. There is studies that show that if you can change to get the same dopamine kick out of spending with investing, you can flick it. But it's very hard, because you're right. The societal norms, trying to keep up with people that you want to aspire to, that drive is incredible, and it's such a huge pull. And everything will point towards you doing that more than what I've just said. But again, maybe there's 5 things you spend on a week. If you can cut one of them out, and that one thing goes to your investing, and then you can cut 2 of them out, and you've got 3 left, and 2 of them are going to your investing, then you can change that norm. You can change that behavior in a positive way, and getting away from the keeping up with Joneses effect and inverted commas, running your own race.
Yeah. So you strategize to make a list of all your fixed costs. So on home loan repayments, insurance, power, internet, all that. And you should see how much you paid for last year, or what you paid for other years. And then you see if you can cut down on each sort of bill.
So this is controlling your controllables.
Is it worth compromising like an essential, like getting a lower internet or a lower health insurance?
Can be.
So that you can use that money to grow an investment.
Yeah, so this is what I call controlling your controllables, right? So people ask, I can't find any savings. So I'm like, well, I promise you can.
Yeah.
And the examples you've just pointed out there, like, I make this very clear. A colleague of mine, she uses this term all the time: never get in the way of an insurance company and a bag of money, right? Yeah, an insurance company is not your friend, right? Your premiums that you have to pay on your home and contents, or if you've got private health, it's your money, right? And what you need to understand is that insurance company actually giving you a benefit for the premium you're paying? So as you just said there, Max, is having unlimited internet downloads worth it versus maybe 100 megabytes a month?
And you said different sort of things you can get are home and car insurance, credit cards, health insurance, power,
all these things.
So you can cut them all down.
Yes, and it's not what we're saying is, we're not saying forego them. It's just change them. Maybe not have the absolute gold standard package. Can you get the silver plus package?
The lower, and then use that money to start an investment.
Correct. And like, you will be fascinated by how much money that can be. Now, I used the study there from the ABS, like all the data there, and I think it's about $440 you can save, which doesn't sound like much per annum, but it matters.
Yeah.
Right? $440 in that alone.
Yeah.
Compound interest on that, blah, blah, blah. It matters. It also means that it's money that can grow, and it's less money to companies that you don't need to pay.
Yeah. You say that you should get a cut down and use that money to do regular contributions into an account. So put that money into an account. My question is, what do you think is an appropriate amount of money to put into an account for someone in their 20s? So as opposed to someone with a family in their 40s.
So unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer to that, because everybody's different. So if everybody's family is different. Or the response normally is, the more you can, the better. Now, that's problematic in itself, because not everybody can afford that.
Yeah.
Again, I would argue that any amount is a worthwhile amount.
Yeah.
Now, by that, I'd probably say minimum's $100
$100 per month. Yeah.
Per month, that's a minimum. But if you can do $100 a week, so $400 a month, right? And you are reinvesting that constantly. So that $400 is then using compound interest. Next month, another $400 in. You're up to $800 plus compound, so on and so forth. Do that over 5 years, right? And you've got to remember, time is the other factor in here. It's not happening for tomorrow. It's not happening for next week. It's not happening for the next month. It's not happening for this year's Christmas. It's happening from 4 or 5 years from now.
So
and it will work. It will happen.
So it's called dollar cost average, is what you called it. So
yes. So dollar cost averaging is a little bit different in the fact that you're right. What it means is that you're adding a little all the time. So it also smooths out market issues. And what that means is, let's say...
Yeah, because the cost of investment, I was going to ask, when you did it, did the cost of investment shares vary much? So one week you could buy more of a stock, the next week you could buy,
And to your answer there, Max, it still happens, right? So, I mean, if you look at right this second as we speak today, yesterday the market fell 1.6%, but over the last 6 weeks, it's actually up 7%, right? So I don't need to look at that because I don't care. And what I mean by that is that, let's say when I first started, I bought at $1, and I got 1,000 units. Then it went up to 105 at my next buy. The amount of units I'm going to buy is going to be
less.
It's going to be 998. But then over the next couple of weeks, let's say it falls from that $1.05 to 95 cents. I'm now going to get, 1,110. Again, I'm making the number up. But if you average those three purchases together, the price will have been actually improved, and you'll have more. So again, economies of scale, better price. So this is dollar cost averaging. So it means that over time, although the market will get higher and higher, history shows you that we'll do that. It takes away the concept of trying to what we call time the market, going, oh, the market's rallied 7%. As I said before, it's too expensive. I don't want to buy it. Removes that risk of you actually not doing anything, or, oh God, the market's going to hell in a handbasket. I shouldn't put my money there. It's falling. Well, you're happy to buy at $1. What's the difference between buying at 90 cents? The advantage is, as I said, you just get to buy more units because you're not thinking about today. You're not thinking about tomorrow. You're not thinking about the end of the year. You're thinking about 5 years from now.
Long term. It's a long term.
And so that's how dollar cost averaging works, is that small amounts working in your favor. It's not one point is that it's not perfect. It's not the perfect, but if you can do that it allows compound interest to work in your favor. It allows you to have a big economies of scale, as we refer to it. So the more you invest, $100 versus $10,000, the return you already know is going to be much better on a $10,000 investment than 100.
So the final chapter discusses how people want to maximize their profits within the shortest time frame, causing one to gamble their money on risky investments. So how do we keep the addictive gambling side of our psyche at bay when investing?
And so this is what we call hyperbolic discounting. In terms of what it is that human beings, again, we've talked about this all the way through this whole thing, is this, again, delayed returns, but we also believe that we want more now than we do in the future. So most people actually believe that when I say the ASX averages 9.8%, a lot of people go, oh, is that it? I'm like, what do you mean that's it? They're like, well, I would have thought it'd be double digit. I'm like, nothing should be returning you 15, 20% per annum. That's incredible. That's high level risk. But we think that. But when I say, okay, what would you be happy to get per annum from your super? And most people will turn and go, oh, my super's giving me about 6 to 7% per annum. I'm fine with that. Your super's 20 plus 30 plus years. I mean, looking at how old you are here, Max, you must be in your, you're well under 30. So
late 20s. Oh, early 20s.
Yeah. So, I mean, for you, your super money is double your life and some, right? So you've got almost, 3 times your life to live again before you can touch your super money. So for you, it's like, well, if I'm getting 7%, that's fine. I don't have to worry about it. But if I said to you, and what's your investment going to be over the next sort of 5 years? Some of you would say higher than that. So getting over that whole, again, principle is what we just discussed. It's dollar cost averaging. It's also about automation, right? So taking away that risk of wanting higher returns and therefore chasing it. Because if you cryptocurrencies is a great example here. It's such an attention-seeking thing, attention bias. The available information shows that it works for people. And it's returning you incredible amounts of money, but it's also losing you incredible amounts of money. It's about, if you do that dollar cost averaging, that savings you get from your, the cutting out of your health insurance and whatever else, and it just automatically happens. It'll get away from what you're talking about there, which is trying to chase the short-termism, the short-term return, because your money is being put into a long-term principle that's working on a constant basis. Again, it's not perfect, but it's a way to get over your bias. It takes away the human element of you making decisions, of you making, correct, right or wrong decisions, because all you're doing is you're just adding to what you want to do, which is that I want to grow my wealth over the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm happy to get 6 to 7% per annum.
Yeah.
That gets away from the short-term problem.
Okay. I think that covers pretty much everything. Any other comments or anything else?
No, thank you very much for letting me talk.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure.
All right.